You heard me say that journalistic ethics is an oxymoron. Journalists have the lowest rate of ethics of any profession in America. I'm going to prove that today by giving you an example of what happened yesterday in a media called Law and Crime. Before that, I'm going to talk about an interesting ethical problem as well, about countries that ban ritual slaughter, which Jews and Muslims are affected by, while at the same time encouraging hunting with bows and arrows and traps and guns. You'll hear all of this on The Der Show. I love animals. I love seeing animals in the wild. I've been on safaris, camera safaris, obviously. In Africa, when I was a kid, my favorite place to go was the zoo. I haven't been told yet that keeping animals in captivity violated somehow some basic animal rights. I love animals. I would never myself hunt an animal. I was invited once to go to North Carolina and do some boar hunting. I said, no, I'm just not going to do that. I don't condemn those who have a different view from me. Hunting is a sport that's traditional in America. The Second Amendment was written probably in part to not only protect against governmental tyranny, but also to protect self-defense and the right of people to hunt. In those days, people hunted for food. Today, people hunt primarily for sport. So what you're going to hear from me today is not a condemnation of hunting. Look, I'm not a vegan. I'm not a vegetarian. I eat meat. I like animals, but I eat meat. You know, we live in a world of compromises, of ethical impurities. But I recognize bigotry when I see it. And that's what I'm talking about today. The European Court of Justice, which is a very politically correct kind of left-wing court, a court with a mixed record in terms of its jurisprudence. But the European Court just recently issued an order upholding a ban that several countries have imposed on kosher and halal slaughtering of animals. As probably many of you know, in the Jewish religion and in the Muslim religion, Jewish religion and Muslim religion are ritualistically very, very, very similar. They both provide that animals have to be killed in certain ways. They both require circumcision of young boys at different ages, to be sure. But there are great similarities between Judaism and Islam, and both require the ritual slaughter of animals. They're designed to be kind to animals. The slaughter method is very, very painless and very effective. It requires an extraordinarily well-sharpened knife and an instantaneous killing, but that's not good enough. In some parts of Europe, and several Northern European countries, starting with Switzerland, other countries as well, now Belgium, have banned kosher and halal ritual slaughter. They will not allow it to be done. And the court in Europe upheld that ban. Okay. Think about that for a second. Is it designed really to protect the interests of animals? Or is it designed really to discourage Muslims, mostly Muslims? Jews may be a collateral damage to this. I don't think there's a movement in Northern Europe to restrict the number of Jews, because there are very, very few Jews who live in most countries in Northern Europe. Each of them has a significant population, a couple of synagogues, several thousand, maybe in the 10,000s, but not in the hundreds of thousands. And they're not a powerful political force, but the Muslims are increasingly immigrating to Northern European countries, and there are efforts, as we know, to try to restrict that. Interestingly enough, some of those efforts comes from the right, but the ban on halal and kosher slaughter generally comes from the left, with some support from bigots on the right who simply overtly want to restrict immigration of certain ethnic groups. But the irony is that the very countries that seek to protect animals from pain by prohibiting kosher slaughter and halal slaughter encourage hunting, shooting animals, wounding them, having them lay there, perhaps for hours, shooting them with bows and arrows. Which animals suffer more? Animals who were shot by a gun, a shotgun, or another gun? Animals who are shot with bows and arrows? Animals who are trapped using traps, sometimes leg traps. Some of those are banned in European countries, but other kinds of traps are not. So when you have a country that has a history of bigotry, a history not only of anti-Muslim attitudes, but also a history of anti-Semitism. The first bans on kosher slaughter were enacted in the run-up to the Second World War in an explicit effort to keep European Jews from coming to Northern European countries. Nobody disputes that. That was the original purpose of the kosher slaughter ban. Now they say, humanitarian. Humanitarian? You allow hunting by bows and arrows? You allow trapping of animals? And you don't allow ritual slaughter, which instantaneously kills? Moreover, hunting, for the most part today, is not done for purposes of feeding the hungry. It's done as a sport, whereas ritual slaughter is done exclusively to get food. You don't kill an animal unless you're going to eat them for nutrition purposes. And yet the European court said, hunting? Okay, we're not going to get into that. It's not for food. It's a different issue. We won't prohibit hunting. We'll allow the states to decide whether to prohibit hunting or not. None of them have done it. But we're going to prohibit ritual slaughter. And if it means that Orthodox Jews and religious Muslims can't come to our country, so be it. It's already been in effect in Switzerland for years, and it's had a devastating impact on the Jewish community there. They have to go to other countries to get their food. Food has become very expensive, and Jews have left. Has anybody ever heard of people leaving a country because they don't allow hunting? I've never heard of that. But Jews and Muslims cannot live comfortably in countries where they can't get religiously certified kosher and halal food. A rabbi who lived in Belgium for many years said the following: outlawing religious practices has long been a tool of xenophobia, anti-Semitism, and racism. Banning shechita, which is the Hebrew word for ritual slaughtering, is merely bigotry disguised as animal rights activism. Jews were the targets historically, and now we are the collateral damage in Europe's war against Muslims. That may overstate it a little bit. I don't think Europe is at war with Muslims. There are elements of European society that are seeking to reduce the number of Muslims who seek asylum or seek to make their homes in Northern European countries. This problem, by the way, has not affected Eastern European countries, which have had a history of anti-Semitism. Countries like Hungary and Poland and even Russia permit ritual slaughter and permit halal slaughter. So it's mostly the liberal countries of the North, the countries that care deeply about animal rights, but also care deeply about protecting the rights of hunters, but not about protecting the rights of Jews and Muslims. It's those countries that have had this legislation. Now, what if it continues to be upheld? It will be challenged, and there will be other lawsuits brought, and we'll see what other countries decide. But what if the next step is to ban circumcision? Children of Jewish parents and children of Muslim parents circumcise their children. And there's a whole movement protecting the rights of the uncircumcised, the rights of babies and children not to have part of their body taken away from them in the name of religion. Well, that would have an even more devastating effect on whether or not Jews and Muslims would feel comfortable living in countries that banned a tradition as old as Abraham. The tradition begins with Abraham circumcising his son Isaac, and it's continued through how many thousands? 3,000 of years of Jewish tradition and religion. Islam, 25 I'm sorry, but 1,500 years or so of tradition. And so the question is, in the alleged name, I don't believe it for a minute. For some, I can understand it. But let me put it this way. If you're an advocate against ritual slaughter and an advocate against halal and kosher slaughtering, if you're an advocate and you're not an advocate against hunting and bow and arrow shooting and trapping, I don't believe you. I don't believe you. Then it seems to me you're using animal rights selectively in a bigoted way to try to have a negative impact on two populations in your country, Orthodox Jews and Muslims. And you're not fooling anybody. If you're out there campaigning first and foremost, against bow and arrow hunting, trapping, shooting with shotguns and all of those things, if you're out there first and then you come second to ritual slaughter, okay, I'll buy it. I'll buy it. I won't agree with it, but I'll buy that you mean it. But if you're out there just campaigning against Jews and Muslims and the way they conduct their lives and not caring at all about hunters who kill for sport, causing much, much more pain to animals, much, much more suffering to animals, then you're a bigot. And there's no excuse for that. And I'd love to hear from any of you who think it's okay to ban ritual slaughter and at the same time not ban hunting. What's more important? Getting food for people on the table, non-vegetarians, non-vegans to be sure, but carnivores. What's more important? Getting food on the table or sport shooting and killing an animal? Yeah, you may eat them after you've shot them if they're edible, but that's not your main purpose. Your main purpose is the act of shooting. If you wanted to just eat the meat, many hunters, can afford to go and buy what they shoot in a store, but that's not the fun of it. The fun of it is kill what you eat, what you kill. And I'm not condemning that. I take no position. I personally wouldn't hunt. I take no position on the rights of others to hunt. But I take a very strong position on allowing hunting and at the same time preventing Orthodox Jews and Muslims from providing food for their children in a way that satisfies their religious obligations. So I'd like to hear from you on this subject, not a usual subject for discussion on this show. Before we turn to calls, I have one more rail that I want to go about. And you all heard me speak yesterday and the day before about the media and about journalists. I have said unequivocally that if you put all the professions that I come in contact with and you come in contact with on a list, doctors, lawyers, rabbis, priests, accountants, you name it, journalists are so low on the list, they're not even on the list. I wouldn't want to be, as a lawyer, on the same list as journalists. That doesn't mean there are not some ethical and responsible journalists. But Walter Cronkite couldn't get a job in the media today. Today, it's the story. Get the story first. Make the story as juicy and sexy as possible. So, proof. What's the proof? As I finished my show yesterday, along came an article that just proved my point beyond any doubt. So here's the background. Yesterday, my lawyers filed a brief for me in the CNN case. You know I'm suing CNN because I said that a president could be impeached if he did anything unlawful or illegal. I said it for 67 minutes on the floor of the Senate, and then 2 days later in answer to a question, I said it again. I said if it's unlawful or illegal, they can be impeached, but they can't be impeached for doing something lawful and legal if the purpose was to get themselves reelected. That's not a ground for impeachment. CNN doctored the tape and had me say a president can do anything, essentially, as long as he wants to be reelected, leaving out the part about illegal or unlawful. So yesterday we filed a brief, a very professional brief by a liberal, thoughtful, intelligent, professional lawyer, laying out the reasons why my case should not be dismissed. Obviously, CNN made a motion to dismiss it on First Amendment grounds and on other grounds, and we filed a very serious brief why it shouldn't be opposed. We cited dozens and dozens of cases and made very serious arguments. So along comes Law and Crime, a media website that has a history of irresponsible and biased and one-sided reporting. And this is the way it reports my brief. It says, Alan Dershowitz references Sarah Palin and Project Veritas while asking the court not to dismiss the defamation suit. And then it makes it sound like my brief was in support only of right-wing organizations. Dershowitz supported his position with references to right-wing stalwarts, Sarah Palin and Project Veritas. Total, complete, categorical lie. What happened is we cited dozens and dozens of cases. One of the cases involved Sarah Palin. She won the lawsuit. There were other cases involving left-wing organizations, centrist organizations, non-political organizations, but they make it sound like I'm relying on Sarah Palin to win my case. And then Project Veritas. We didn't rely. In a footnote, it's mentioned that Project Veritas has a videotape of the head of CNN, Jeffrey Zucker, saying, let's use CNN to get our political enemies. Let's use CNN to go after our political enemies. Let's make them look like fools. Obviously, that's relevant to my case. Not Veritas that's relevant. It's the videotape of the head of CNN doing to somebody else exactly what we allege he did to me. That's relevant. We put it in a footnote. But that becomes the headline. Now we come to my favorite part of it, where they describe my speech in front of the United States Senate, which I did for 67 minutes and which got very positive feedback, not only from Republicans, but Democrats. Several Democratic senators came over and congratulated me, and many of the newspapers and media on both sides said I had done an excellent job. But they simply say that it was panned by everybody. Panned by everybody. And then they have a cite. They have a cite to how my speech on the Senate floor and my answers to questions was panned by everybody, by academics all over the country and by everybody. So then you check the cite. What's the cite to? An article written 2 years before I made my speech to the Senate, in which one academic condemns me for saying that maybe if the president were to be impeached, the Supreme Court, in an extreme case, might want to review the impeachment. A completely separate and different article. And yet they cite that as the proof that my speech was panned. Shame on Law and Crime. They are a disgrace to the media and to the legal profession. Do not believe what you read in their stories. Don't even believe their cites. Check every cite, because they say Dershowitz's speech was panned. Then they cite to a 2-year earlier article unrelated to what I said. And it goes on and on and on. And you read the whole article, and it just repeats what CNN does. It never, ever says categorically that I stated that a president could be impeached if he did something illegal or unlawful. It just repeats what CNN said, and it's supposed to be reporting, and it never, ever says. But if you read what Dershowitz said completely from beginning to end, you'll see he said unlawful, illegal, that's different. CNN edited it out, doctored it. That's the essence of the lawsuit. You wouldn't learn that if you read Law and Crime, because Law and Crime is out to get me. They're out to get me because they don't like the fact that I defended President Trump. Fine, let them write an editorial about it. But this is a news report. This is a report that you're supposed to rely on to get a news analysis of the brief I filed. You won't get it. You won't get it from reading Law and Crime. You won't ever learn anything truthful from reading Law and Crime. So don't read it, or read it skeptically, or read it critically, or write to their editors, write to their publishers and tell them you are misleading. You are engaging in fraud, in media fraud against your readers, lawyers and non-lawyers alike, by distorting and making up stories that didn't occur, misciting sites, misstating the facts, omitting facts. You are CNN on paper. CNN. And you are unfortunately all too typical of today's media. And so my proof, Law and Crime, perfect example of why journalistic ethics are the lowest form of ethics of any profession in the United States today. Journalistic ethics, an oxymoron. Law and crime, journalistic ethics don't belong in the same paragraph or in the same book. Interested in your views? Do you have stories or examples of ethical violations by journalists? We're going to be talking about that a lot on these shows because the media is a very important part of our system of checks and balances. But who's checking the media? Who's checking on the media? Who's guarding the guardians? Well, the Dirt Show will be checking on the media and guarding the guardians. And now you check on me by your questions and comments. Let's turn to them on the Dirt Show. Our first call today is from John.
Hi, my name is John Davis. I'm a retired prosecutor in Washington, D.C. I'm responding to your tweet about martial law. I believe the president has more than enough probable cause to invoke the Insurrection Act of 1807, and I do not believe he has to declare martial law, although I believe he has the option under the Constitution and the Act to do so. I do believe that it would be appropriate for the Department of Homeland Security to execute warrants, search warrants of the disputed states where fraud is suspected, and also to take custody of the evidence in the form of the machines in those states. And I personally hope that the president does so for the good of the country and for the good of the people.
Well, I sure hope he doesn't. I don't think he has the constitutional authority to invoke martial law. In terms of subpoena, of course, you bring a lawsuit, you can subpoena the machines, you can do what you want. You do it within the rule of law. Why do you need to claim there's been an insurrection? There's been no insurrection. There's been no invasion. If Russia hacks our elections, I don't consider that an invasion. I can't imagine the courts would consider that an invasion. And President Trump hasn't suggested that he wants to invoke martial law. Martial law is not in the Constitution. So, A, I hope the president doesn't do it. I know the president won't do it. And B, if he did it, it would be unconstitutional. And I think the courts, including his own justices, would not allow that to go forward. Let's turn now to our next call.
I feel that President Trump should initial the martial law immediately. He needs to stop the steal, and we should never, ever let someone be president who didn't win just because they cheated. And we need to be tougher on China. And this needs to happen ASAP.
Well, apparently there are a lot of people out there who want to see martial law declared. It cannot happen. It will not happen. Martial law is a contradiction of terms. If it's martial, it's not law. If it's law, it's not martial. Martial means control by the military. Our Constitution was set up to prohibit the military from becoming involved in domestic life in America. The military has no jurisdiction over American cities. Yes, you can have the National Guard, but that has to be done by the governors. The Insurrection Act requires congressional approval. You're not going to get that. The president has limited authority under our Constitution. He can see that the laws be faithfully executed. Congress, with the approval of the president, can suspend the writ of habeas corpus. The Supreme Court has posed great limitations on that. So the Constitution is not on your side. And I'm on the side of the Constitution. Thanks. Let's do the last call if it's short. Our last call today is from Jack.
The reason I listen to your show is to learn. So when you discuss topics such as the Constitution, or can an employer require their employees to undergo to take a COVID vaccine, that's really of interest. But when you talk about Trump instituting martial law with 3 weeks to go in his presidency, I mean, that's just almost a bunch of puffery as far as I'm concerned. So I wish your podcast, and it is my number one podcast that I listen to at night, would aim more towards the learning and less of the puffery. I think would be great.
Well, I appreciate your call. I think learning about martial law is important. You heard from two previous callers. They support martial law. It's not something I made up. It's something General Flynn suggested. And according to the New York Times, President Trump asked about it, and he was told that he couldn't do it. So I think it's a very relevant subject to discuss. But I take your point, and I'll try to do more learning and less puffery on The Durst Show. But keep listening to The Durst Show, and see you soon.